I am Laurel Aylesworth. I am a children's book illustrator and hopefully author pretty soon. I live in Barrington, Rhode Island. I have two girls, ages 10 and 13. I've been doing illustration professionally, I would say maybe for the past 5 years, maybe. And I got into it because my kids were little and we were going to the library a lot and I saw these beautiful books and honestly, some of them not so beautiful. And I was like, hey, if they can do it, maybe I could learn.
So are you like self-taught, or do you have an art degree or something like that in your background, or what? How did you get there?
I am self-taught. My mother was an artist, so I kind of got that proclivity for visual arts. I have an English degree from Mount Holyoke College, so I'm trying to put that to use finally. But I've always loved to draw. When I was in middle school, like I would just draw in my room and draw elves and princesses and all that stuff. So,
I think lots of kids go through that art phase, and then some of them
mhm.
kind of let it go and others keep up with it. My 10-year-old, I didn't realize that age-wise, or I guess life stage-wise, I have a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old, so real close. And the 10-year-old's kind of in that right now. He's very into art and drawing, and so we'll see if he sticks with it. So
Great. Yeah, I left it for a long time and then I came back to it. So you never know.
yeah, exactly. That's how writing was for me too. So I'm Chelsea Tornetto, and I am a children's book author based in Southeast Missouri. And Laurel and I got to work on a book together. And in the traditional publishing world, they kind of keep author and illustrator apart for many reasons, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, through the course of this conversation. But anyway, so we thought it would be fun, now that the book is set to release and all the illustrations are finished, to get together and talk and do all the discussing that we didn't get to do during the book process. We have a lot of people at Home Author who are interested in illustrating, but like you, they don't have, a formal degree or anything. So do you have any advice for someone who's artistic but doesn't really know like how to get started?
Yes, I can relate to that because the way I got started was I would find a corner of my counter when the kids were little, 15 minutes, maybe half an hour at a time, depending on their nap schedule and whatever. And then I would carve out time to just draw. And I cannot speak highly enough of taking classes. I got my start through SVS Learn, a trio of really great instructors. They have a podcast called 3 Point Perspective you could check out. They have a forum where you could, meet other illustrators. And so taking classes, number one, just learn as much as you can. I know not everybody, especially parents, have a lot of time to dedicate to it. So just a little bit each day. Another thing that's really important is finding another group of illustrators who are at least as good as you or better, that you can work up and level up your work.
We talk about
Because,
that with writing too, all the time, how important it is to have that community.
yeah, yeah. And when you bring your stuff to, say, like your partner or your kid, and you're like, what do you think? And they're like, oh, that's so nice. I love it. But what you're really looking for is like honest critiques, like, this is great, but the perspective is off, or the palette is a little like jarring. Yeah, like a group of peers is so important.
Yeah.
So,
We always say with writing too, and I'm sure it's the same with illustrating, that there's a difference between feedback and expert feedback, or knowledgeable, experienced feedback,
yeah,
because people who are in the industry, or who are, like you said, just a little bit better than where you're at,
yeah,
have a different eye. They look at it with a different perspective, and they can give you a little bit better advice than your mom or your
yeah.
spouse or whatever. So yeah.
Exactly. And I think in the beginning, we all want that, like, oh, you're talented, keep going. That's great.
Yeah.
But publishing you're gonna need a thicker skin
Hmm.
for when the rejections do come in and they pile up.
And they
Because
are
it's,
always going to pile up for sure. So
Okay, so yeah, just getting that muscle going with like, okay, and you don't have to take the critique. You could be like, well, maybe, maybe not. So just
Yeah.
learning to take criticism from your peers.
And that confidence, because I always have a lot of people starting out who don't know when to ignore a critique and when to take that advice. And there's really no way around that other than just experience.
Yeah,
You might, every piece of critique you get for the first year, you try to change that thing. And then eventually you realize, you know what, I'm going to stick with what I thought on that thing, but I'm going to listen to my, critique on this one. So you just
yeah,
have to have experience and you have to let time pass basically to get there.
absolutely. Yeah. I'm so curious about authors' process because I'm so jealous. I've always wanted to be a writer and I've tried it and I know how hard it is. So can you tell me about like once you get an idea or like maybe before that, how you get an idea and then where you go from there?
Yeah. So before I answer that, are you writing? Because you said you wanted to be an author. So are you writing stories too?
I wrote my first, well, second picture book dummy and it's with my agent. So just
Awesome.
waiting for feedback and that was hard. Okay. So lots of
So, writing process wise, everybody has a different part of the process that's a challenge for them or different, stumbling blocks. A lot of people struggle to come up with ideas, and I'm not that person. I have like an idea every day. I have like a file that I just keep lists of ideas, and so that's never my problem. My problem is always like, wrestling with the structure. So the first thing that I do when I get an idea is because the idea may be, it may be a character, it may
yeah,
be a specific situation or problem. It might be that I'm starting with a theme, like a message, like, oh, I really wish I could teach kids this. So it just depends on what the idea is, first of all, whether it's a character or sometimes for me, I'm a rhymer. And so a lot of the times my idea is really a title. It's just a phrase like that sounds fun and, you
yeah,
know, is a starting point. So wherever I start, then my next step is wrestling with how to approach it structure wise. So, if it's a character, does that character lend itself to just like a concept book where I'm just showing that character in different scenes, or would it be better as a narrative? And if it's going to be a narrative, is it going to be humorous? Is it going to be a circular structure where they end up where they started? So it's kind of like just wrestling with how to approach the story from a structural perspective. Because for me, once I get that in my head and I'm like, okay, I can see how the book's going to be set up. Like, is it, like I said, going to be circular? Or is it going to be like a call and response? Or once I get that in my head, then I can write from there. So that's kind of my first step. And then being a rhymer, usually the next step is wordplay and wrestling with rhymes and sitting
it's
for
like
hours and changing one word and, that kind of thing. So
thesaurus.com, like open on your computer all the time. Like
that
this,
one. And then my favorite one is actually Rhyme Zone. I think it's
oh,
.com, rhymezone.com, because it has, like, if you type in a word, it gives you rhymes, but then it also gives you them by syllables. So it'll say, these are
oh
one
wow.
syllable rhymes, two syllable rhymes, three syllable rhymes. And then it also has a tab of near rhymes, which I try not to use, but sometimes when you're desperate,
Yeah.
and so that website is really helpful. That's kind of like on my bookmark list. Are you a rhymer?
I am terrible, terrible. I can do alliteration on a minimal basis, but I think rhyming is a special skill set. To
It
do it
definitely.
really well, which is like why I was excited to do your manuscript because I know how challenging rhyming can be, and I know how like publishers are very, very
Ugh,
finicky.
yeah,
So if
they
it's
are.
good, it's like, yeah, it's a pleasure to work on.
Heard all of that when I started off about how hard it was to get into traditional publishing with rhyme.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of what comes out of me. And so
Yeah.
I've learned I have a natural ear for it, but I am not, in case there's anyone out there who wants to write and rhyme and you're intimidated by like the terminology, like Renee Latulippe has an amazing YouTube channel about rhyme. But she's like brilliant. And so she uses like terms like iambic pentameter and like all of those things. And I don't know those words. I mean, I'm learning them, but it's almost like being able to play music by ear. It's kind of like that's how I rhyme. I don't really know the mechanics of it. I just have a natural ear for it. So yeah, it's definitely hard to do really, really well. So, but it's like a crossword puzzle for me. I love it. So
So do you sit down at a computer and or a typewriter, or do you walk around and you just kind of write it in your head first?
with the big picture stuff that I was talking about, wrestling with like the structure, that's always just like when I'm going about my day or in the shower.
Yeah.
It seems like I'm
Yeah.
always thinking of things in the shower.
Yeah.
Rhyme, I have to typically I'm at my computer because I like to use Rhyme Zone. And because typing it somehow helps me with the beat of it.
Mm,
And I also like to look at two versions of the same line or stanza. So I'll type one version and then I'll be able to type the other one below it and compare those. So the screen really helps me with that. But the other thing that I do against my will is
yeah.
I will get something in my head rhyme wise at night before I go to bed. And then I lay there and am rhyming in my head and, trying to go to sleep, but then sitting up and picking up my phone and typing something. So, I mean, I try not to do that, but it happens for
But
sure.
it's funny because sometimes I'll space out on the couch and it looks like I'm just taking a nap, but I'm actually
Yes.
working. So it's like, and it's constant, like, yeah, the shower or walking, driving, walking the
Yep.
dog,
I
sometimes
know it is. And
walking.
I joke with my husband. I'm like, I'm working right now. My it doesn't look like I'm working, but my brain is working. And
Yeah.
he gets that, of course. But it is important, I think, as a creative, and I don't know, maybe this you can answer this as a question. I like really find it important to be bored sometimes. Like give myself mental space to
Yeah.
like not have a task that I'm doing.
Yes. Yes. If I sit down and attack something, like my husband is a lawyer, and I imagine him like sitting at his computer and he's got this papers and it's like time to work. And
Yeah.
it doesn't work with me. It's like trying to wrestle something you can't get a hold of.
Yep.
And when I get a manuscript at first, I need to just let it percolate, and kind of wait for imagery to come. I can't force it,
Yeah.
um, as much as I want to. I want to be more of that productive
Yeah.
artist. But it doesn't always work like that. So
How do you get things from publishers? So like when they
Mhm.
sent you my manuscript, what did that look like? What kind of information did they give you or guidance or whatever? And then what's your first step when you're tackling a new project like that?
Yeah, I do have an agent. Her name is Essie White at Storm Literary
Oh
Agency. Do you
yeah, we're both stormies, aren't we?
Yeah, she's crazy. And so she'll contact me via email and say, "Hey, this publisher is interested in you. Can you read these manuscripts and see if you're interested?" And so I'll read them and I'll think about it. And then I'll get back to her, and then she'll kind of set up uh, contact between myself and the publisher.
Okay.
And they just send me the manuscript, and there might be some art notes or some comps. I don't remember if you included comps in yours or not.
I mean, I know that my agent did when she pitched it to them, but that's like, I don't know if they send you my query letter from my agent or if they have their own stuff that they send you. So,
No, sometimes comps and the manuscript, of course. And so then I get started with, well, like once I say yes and the contract is all kind of fleshed out. So I have the manuscript in my head and I'll just walk around with it in my life. And hopefully the publisher will give me a good amount of time, like at least 6 months to do the whole project. Any shorter, get out of there. Like it's just I start with paper and pencil. That could be printer paper. Any new project, I'll get like a new sketchbook. Just I don't know, it's like a little reward, and I can
Yeah.
dedicate everything to that book. Yeah, so I'll start with like character sketches. This is from my last book, The Blue Canoe,
Oh
written by
yeah, I saw
Cheryl.
that one. That looks beautiful.
But let me show you some like really bad sketches.
You don't have any really bad sketches.
So the beginning is about being loose, just getting your ideas down. The more worried you are about what it looks like, the tighter you get. Like you're physically like, ugh. And it shows up in your art. So start loose. Okay, so the next thing is after getting some ideas and stuff, this publisher wanted to see character sketches and like nicely rendered turnarounds to show that you can consistently do a character throughout an entire book. Um, and once those are approved, then I can go into the storyboarding. I figure out like the page turns, what to do for each page. Like, do we want to do spots or a full
Right.
page spread or just like a half page spread? Because that's really important. It's sort of like beats in the story. So spots can typically make a story go faster, you
Right.
know, and then there are these emotional beats where you kind of need to land on, and those are more like full spreads where it's like you want to take in like this moment
Yeah.
and down the story. So it's finding those beats in the manuscript and working that out on paper. So
And that is totally up to you, right? Or is it different by publisher? Like I kind of as an
yeah.
author, I'm thinking of that too as I write. And I'll have some brief art notes, but I don't ever get into this is a spot illustration, this is this. So it's just interesting. They don't have you ever had a publisher tell you what they want on each page in that regard, or is that always up to you?
So the ones that I work with, they trust the artist to that they know what we're doing, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I did have a potential project and it was like full of art notes. And it was like, this is where this is going and this is where this is going. So there was no creative license on my part. They were just hiring my hand to draw.
Right.
And I won't, I won't work with publishers like that. It's like, where's the fun? You
You
know, what's
you
going on?
passed on that project. Yeah.
I definitely did. So,
That's interesting because I tell my self-published authors all the time who I coach how important it is to trust your illustrator. I mean, first of all, to do your research because they don't have access to these, groups of professional artists. They're just out looking for someone on Fiverr or someone, a freelancer. So first do your research, but also once you've found someone who's really talented to give them that artistic license and let them
mm,
use their skills to improve your story rather than dictating every little detail. And so that's really interesting to hear you talk about that from the artist's perspective.
yeah. Yeah, they've got to really have a high level of trust because
Yeah.
someone who's investing hundreds, maybe a couple $1,000s in their
Yeah.
story, that's scary, you
Yeah.
know.
We talked about how with traditional publishers, they try to keep some distance between author and illustrator. So talk about why you think that is, what you like about it, what you don't like about it. And I'll share mine too when you're done. So
Yeah, at first I thought it was weird. I was like, what? Like, why? And now that I have a few books under my belt, I get it. It's like they want to honor our skill set and our creativity and to create that space that says, you know what, I trust you, here's your space to do what you do. And the author has opportunity in the art notes to say, this is what I think should happen. But then letting the illustrator kind of digest that and say, like, make their own decisions.
right.
Um, yeah, so I think it's a great idea. But
Have you
yeah,
ever, do you have any examples of times when you wish you could talk to the author or when you were really glad that there was that distance either way?
um, I can't think of anything because I know that Familius, they would actually bring on the author for during the approval process.
Yes.
And so that was nice because then I would actually get some feedback.
Yeah.
Because artists are a little, I don't know, insecure. So we need like feedback to be like, are we on the right track? And
Yeah, well, we're all that way. I think that's like as creatives, that's a big part of, it's art, it's subjective. Not
yeah.
everybody is going to love what you write or what you draw. And so,
Yeah.
um, and and especially with picture books, and this I think is one of the things I love about picture books is that you're collaborating about something that's very personal. I mean, I've created this poem or whatever it is, and I'm proud of it. It's a piece of art that I've created. And at the same time, you're going to use that as a jumping off point to create something that's personal to you. And so it's kind of hard to find that balance
Mhm.
of collaborating, but still giving each other space. And I do think that the way traditional publishers have it set up um, allows for that for the most part.
Yeah. So do you ever get a chance to choose the illustrator? Do they present like, okay, there are these three illustrators, which one do you like best? Or do you
Yeah,
have any say?
so um as with many things in publishing, it depends on the publisher. Like you said, you had one that was different and you passed on that one. Um so my first couple books, I didn't have any say in the illustrator. I got an email. We signed the contract, and then 6 months later or more, I got an email that said, "Here's the illustrator we've chosen to go with your book," and they send me the portfolio, and I'm like, "Okay." And I mean, I've always been happy with it, and that's how it was with you. I just got an email, and that's great. I have had one publisher who did send me 8 portfolios, 8 links
Oh,
to virtual portfolios for artists. And they asked me to rank them from 1 to 8, which
oh, nice.
was like, I don't know, it was really like awesome on the one hand because I did have a lot of, I ranked them and whoever was number one, that's who they reached out to first. So it
Yeah.
was really nice to have that agency. Um, but it was also very overwhelming. Like 3 would have been nice.
Yeah, that's bad. I
So yeah, 8 was kind of overwhelming. But I mean, it was nice to have that say in things. And then after giving them my list, and once they had signed a contract with the illustrator, then there was that, I didn't see anything until we were approving black and white sketches.
wow.
And then I made some notes on those and
Yeah.
then color. So like 2 touch points after that of notes. So
Yeah. Similarly, like how would someone who is looking to write picture books get started? And um, in relation to that, like what's your advice to those who are kind of struggling to find that voice?
yeah, voice in picture books is hard because publishers are looking for it. Like they're looking for a unique voice. So you have to let yourself be yourself in your writing and let your natural voice shine through. But at the same time, they're looking for specific voices. And if yours is not one of those, if you have a very, for example, I've noticed in the past few years that they're looking for very quirky or humorous voice
Mhm.
in picture books. And I have a lot of clients who have a very sort of old fashioned, once upon a time, there was this, this, and this. And so it's really hard. They're like, well, this is the way I write. And that may not be what traditional publishers are looking for. So yeah, I get that. And that's really hard. I always, the number one way to get started in picture books is to read as many picture books as you can that have come out in the past 5 years, basically, because so many books come out each year. And if you want to know what publishers are looking for, that's the best way is to read current stuff. And not that you want to try to mimic that, but it can inspire you to write something maybe a little outside your comfort zone, and to stretch a little bit, which is good as a writer and a creative. So that's always my number one piece of advice.
And you were a teacher for a long time.
It was.
And I would imagine that's a very different mindset than the creative writer type. So how do you separate those two trains of thoughts? Because sometimes when I start to write, the editor comes in and is like, "Oh, this is terrible. Stop
Yeah.
it." Um, so how do you balance that? Like, how do you put that away for a little
Yeah.
bit?
Well, I'm lucky, I think, in that you know how they always say that the best way to learn something is to teach it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I I did teach in the classroom for 17 years. But I also now have transitioned to basically teaching children's book authors. So I'm a coach, I'm a developmental editor. And so when you spend your whole day teaching people, let it go. Let yourself write a rough draft that's just really horrible. I think some of that soaks into yourself, and I do find myself kind of coaching myself, like, okay, you can let this
Oh, that's
go.
nice. Yeah.
You can relax and just write a rough draft. It's what would you tell your clients? Or what would you tell your students? How many times have I told students over the years, it's okay to not get it perfect the first time. And so I think that I do a lot of teaching myself because I'm doing that all day long anyway.
Yeah.
But I also think the teacher in me is helpful when I get past the rough draft stage, because I'm so used to telling my students, make it better, like keep working on it,
Yeah.
keep improving it. And I have that mindset too. So I don't know. I don't know if the teacher in me is a good thing or a bad thing, but I feel like that voice is definitely there all the time. So
I think that's great. And you're reminding me of for illustrators, um, I always forget how to draw every single time. I like turn to my husband, I'm like, I forgot how to draw again. And he's like, every time. And there's always gonna be an ugly phase in the artwork.
yeah,
And I think a lot of artists struggle with that. They're like, oh, wow, I'm really terrible. I'm gonna stop. So what you're saying is like keep going is also important for illustrators because there's always gonna be that awkward like hands are so hard to draw.
I can
Pers-
imagine.
but step away for a bit and come back to it. Sometimes that's the best thing is to
Yeah.
take.
And I think that like a lot of my new writers who come to me for editing and stuff have this impression that once you're a published writer, or once you've written a book, you're good at it, and then you're always good at it. And it's like, like I
Yeah.
don't think you understand that it doesn't matter how many books you've published or how professional of a author or illustrator you are. It's like you said, there's always going to be an ugly phase. I mean, I write really ugly stuff all the time. And it's not like once you reach a certain level in your career, you're done doing
Nope.
bad work.
Nope. I have an acquaintance who is a veteran illustrator, probably in the industry for like 30, 40 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
he still experiences that. He's like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
is it going to be as good as my other stuff? Because now you're comparing yourself to yourself.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
never ends.
No, it doesn't. Sorry, people. That might be depressing, but
Yeah.
that's
But I think
that's
that's the point though. Like for artists, it's like you're trying to chase this feeling of like, oh, I'm expressing exactly the way I wanted to, which is an amazing feeling.
yeah.
Sometimes elusive. So
I can relate to that so much. I've gotten this question multiple times in interviews, which is why do you write? Like what motivates you to write? And I think a lot of people expect a children's book author to say something like I just want to impact kids, and that's true. But it's that challenge of I
mhm.
want it's like solving a crossword puzzle or something like that, where I have this vision in my head of a thing I want to express. I don't know, like an emotion or a moment or a feeling, and being able to choose the exact right words that do that, that's why I write. That's the fun of it. So yeah, I get that for sure.
And so, why picture books? Like, why do you, and same for me, it's like, why did we choose this age group to connect with? Are we connecting to ourselves?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on there?
I don't know. I feel like for me, I like picture books because they're short. I think I'm a little bit of an ADHD in my writing. Like I wrote one middle grade novel and oh my gosh, it was the longest, most painful thing. Like I just like, let's move on to something else. So I like that they're short, but I also feel like I'm like a wannabe artist. Like I
Hmm.
always liked art as a kid. I enjoy drawing and making, but I'm not great at it. So I can picture what I want it to look like in my head, but I just can't do that myself. And so I love picture books because I get a partner who can do what I can't do. So
That's how I feel about writing. Yeah, I can relate. Yep.
yeah, it's definitely a lot of self-publishers choose to self-publish because they don't want to give up the agency on the art side of it, like the idea of being told here's the illustrator and giving that, they don't like that. And I'm the opposite. I've always loved the idea of being surprised by someone's art going with my words. I just think that's like a really nice surprise. So
Yeah. And it's such a skill for a writer to know when to back off with the words and be like, oh, I think there's a moment here that the artist can fill on their
yeah.
own. So that takes a lot of skill, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, and I enjoy that. I look for moments to let the art tell the story in a book. And so I think that that's a quality that picture book authors need to develop is finding the way to let the art, finding a moment on the page to step back and let the art take over.
Yeah.
I have tons of clients who come to me and say that they want a friend or a relative to illustrate for them. So and so is a great artist. I want them to do the artwork for it. So um, and I know that you know that art is different than illustration. And it's just a different skill set. So, what would you say to someone, or what advice would you give about that in terms of what do you think the biggest difference is between just being a good artist and being a
Yeah.
good illustrator?
A good artist can do like a one-off painting or a collage, and it's a standalone.
Yeah.
Illustrators are into narrative art, and narrative art in itself is a specialized skill. Number one, you need to be very consistent with your characters throughout the entire book. And again, knowing when those beats are within the story. And all of the art needs to support the story. Like it's great if you're an artist and you create a moment, but that's one moment. Where it's in a picture book, you have to kind of carry on a theme. And again, every choice that you make, you have to think, okay, am I doing this in service of the story?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's really important to distinguish between the two. I think artists can become narrative illustrators for sure, but it
Yeah.
takes a lot of work and a lot of study and struggle. So
And that's where those courses you mentioned, like taking courses and actively learning the talent of illustrate, the skills that are specific to illustration,
yeah,
outside of just art skills. So
yeah. I
um,
also want to shout out to the Highlights Foundation. I just took a class with them and they're great.
that
Uh,
is where I started.
oh, no
Um,
way.
that was the very first thing that I was a teacher. I had written like a instructional book for teachers and then I was like, I really want to write children's books, but I have no idea where to start. And I found the Highlights Foundation and got a scholarship to one of their like retreats where you go to their cabin in the woods and like for a whole weekend. And so I had never flown by myself anywhere. I flew out by myself to Pennsylvania. It was terrifying. It was one of the biggest like I'm an introvert. That was one of the biggest risks I had ever taken for myself. And it was amazing. And it was the start of everything for me. So yes, definitely shout out to Highlights.
Yeah. Oh, and also, um, for the newbies, I can't believe I forgot this, but SCBWI,
Yeah.
when you're a newbie, that's where you gotta go because you can do the conferences, you can do them online or in person. If you go to the in-person conferences, you will not meet more friendlier people. It's
No.
great, and supportive. So, and that's where you can meet your peers and get
Yeah.
into the industry. So super
It's so
important.
funny. How much, maybe it's because when I taught for 17 years, I taught junior high, I taught seventh graders. And
Ooh,
at that age, you watch those kids trying to find their people, and figure out who they are, what kind of people they want to hang with. And I'm an adult, I'm supposed to know that already. But I remember being so nervous to go to highlights and then to my first SCBWI conference, and both times at the end, walking out and being like, I found people. Like, these are my people. Like, I get this is where I want to be. So you're right about that for sure.
have you ever had creative block? And if so, how did you get past it?
Oh yeah, everybody gets writer's block or creative block or whatever. So this is really non-advice, I guess, but I always just tell people, and myself too, I tell myself this, that you have to step away from whatever it is that's stuck.
Mm.
And I have friends who are opposite. I have writer friends who are like, if they have writer's block, they have like these things that they do to get their creative juices flowing. Like, oh, I do yoga, or oh, I read poetry or whatever. And I'm the opposite. I'm like, I just have to step away because I feel like usually the cause of my writer's block or creative block is mental fatigue. It's I'm
Um,
tired of that topic, or I'm tired of writing, or my brain is just, maybe there's a lot going on in my life. I've found that just my brain can be too full of stuff, whether it's doctor's appointments and work and, all these things. And my brain just can't, there's no room for it to be creative. And
yeah,
so stepping away from the thing that I'm working on, but also, I think, like I mentioned before, stepping away from enough other things in life to give yourself room to be bored and to mentally kind of breathe.
totally. Yeah, when my 10-year-old says, I'm bored, I'm like,
Good.
good.
I know. Maybe you'll come up with something brilliant, right? Have you ever had a manuscript that you agreed to work on and then you found yourself wanting to make changes to the story as it went along? You're like, oh, I think it would be fun if this happened, or, having ideas. And have you ever pitched that and actually made changes to a story?
Yes, actually, my first book, um, it was just this passage where it kind of showcased a bunch of different kinds of families. And in this family, they were like the parent was like a tickle monster or something. And the art note was like maybe the parent was, um, you know, tickling. And it just didn't sit well with me. I felt like the child needed to be the one with the power.
Yeah.
So I just kind of put an email off to my publisher and I said, what do you think about this? And the author actually did agree and changed the wording a bit. So I think if you do have an issue with the manuscripts, you have to have a good reason
Mm.
because the author has put in so much time and effort and blood and sweat and tears into their project. So if
Yeah.
you are going to make a change, I think be gracious about it and explain why. So
So when you pitched or suggested that, you reached out to the publisher. Did they contact the author and then get back to you? Or was this like you talked to the author about it kind of thing? Or how did that work?
they got in touch with the author. So again, like the wall was between us. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
thought that was good. It's like they're professionals. They know how to tactfully, handle situations like that. So
yeah, the more I've worked on books and experienced that gap between author and illustrator, I was like you. At first I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. I should talk to them. I'm the one who wrote the story. You like, we should talk. But it's a lot like real estate, or like if you're trying to sell a house and someone comes to look at your house you don't want to be there. Like it's nice to have that real estate agent as that, like, which I guess is what our literary agents do for us too, as that go between, so that because people get their feelings hurt, it's your house, it's your home, and that's how a story is. It's my story. So having that little bit of distance and that reminder that this is a professional situation and it's okay, and it's just healthy, I think. So
I agree. Who's your favorite author?
my favorite author right now of all time is John Flanagan. He writes this fantasy series called The Ranger's Apprentice, and there's like
Ooh, I'm
12
down to
novels.
fantasy right now. This is good. Okay.
Oh my God, I love him. He's from Australia, and it's this series like medieval fantasy, and these rangers are these archers who defend the kingdom. Anyway, I love it. And they actually just signed a deal to make it into a movie, so I'm so excited. So he's my favorite author. Picture book wise, I always have to go old school, and Frog and Toad are my favorite. A Frog and
They're
Toad
behind
book.
you.
Yeah, they're right behind me. A Frog and Toad book can make me laugh. Like, I mean, I made my daughter, my 14-year-old, read it with me the other night, and we were cracking up because Toad is my spirit animal. Like the story we read was the last time was they were eating cookies and they couldn't stop eating cookies. And Toad's like, we must stop, as he ate another cookie. Like, I just love them so much. So those are my favorites.
Yeah. And talk about voice. Like it's definitely Frog and Toad when you read it. It's like it's very
Yeah,
voice.
but it's not like quirky or out there. Like if you read the text, it's very Frog did this, Toad did this. The voice is almost in their actions and in their personalities and how they do things. So
Yep.
who's your favorite illustrator or author?
I would say the one that actually got me into wanting to do illustration was Eliza Wheeler.
Okay.
She wrote Miss Maple's Seeds. And it struck me because it wasn't this like primary color palette. It wasn't saccharine, like kind of what you kind of think a picture book is. It was just very subdued and lovely, and it had a wonderful character. And things that are kind of like a pleasure to read aloud is so
Yeah.
important. So I would say, yeah, Eliza
Okay.
Wheeler.
Awesome. I'm gonna have to look that one up. I'm not familiar with it off the top of my head. So if you could create a project to work on, like, I mean, like your dream project, is there a certain topic that you want to draw? A certain type of style of story that you want to work on?
So this kind of goes right back to the highlights class.
Oh yeah.
Um, because she was like, "What do you like to draw?" And I was like, "Wait, what? What?" And I was like, "I've never drawn a witch." So I actually am working on my own book, centered around this little witch character. And I have all the creative license in the world, and it is so hard because I'm putting so much pressure on myself because it's all me. It's like I'm the story, I'm the artist.
Yeah.
So, I think that's my dream project, but it's also coming with a lot of um, difficulty because there's no parameters. Like I can do whatever I want. So
Yeah, and that's freeing and also terrifying.
yeah, yeah, like a blank page.
Yeah, intimidating. So do you have a sketchbook just for that project?
I do. Yes, I
Yeah.
do.
I'm so glad that we got to do this. I should do this with all of my illustrators after each project, get them all on here and just chat because it's really
Well, it's
nice.
the first time I've been able to talk to a writer, so thank you.
Same, same. And our book Chalk the Walk is the book that we worked on together, and it comes out in the spring. We will be sharing all about that later. So
Sounds great.
awesome. Thanks, Laurel.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Bye.
Bye.